Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, A Curious Scene. The rain had begun at tea time, a steady, proper English downpour that blurred the hedgerows and polished the lanes to black glass. By 8 o'clock Little Barrow looked as though someone had drawn the world in soft pencil and then passed a wet thumb across it. Slate roofs shone, gutters chattered, the elms along Church Row stooped like old men conferring. On such a night sensible people banked the fire and drew the curtains. Only Edwin March did the opposite. Mr. March lived alone in Brook House, a narrow, 3-story affair with a pointed gable that gave it a sulky look. His habits were well known and frequently discussed in the village shop. He took his walks at unfriendly hours, he quarrelled over minor points of boundary and drainage, and, most curious of all, when the rain fell with conviction he climbed to the roof to wash in the purity of the sky, as he once put it to the startled postmistress. Some called it harmless, some called it mad. But eccentricities are measured by the harm they do, and until that night Edwin March's washed few except himself. Hercule Poirot arrived in Little Barrow by accident and by impeccable footwear. A punctured tire forced his motorcar to the verge near the green, and the landlord of the White Hart, Mr. Vale, offered both a mechanic and an apologetic supper. Poirot, who disliked the English rain as a cat dislikes baths, regarded his immaculate shoes, then the doormat, and finally the puddles with a private dismay. "Courage, Miss Sauliers," he murmured, wiping a droplet from a gleaming toe. "We shall endure." At supper the talk was of the weather until the door blew open and Miss Frances Blythe came in with the rain on her shawl and an impatience that seemed to bring its own draught. She refused a drink, asked for a message to be taken up to Brook House, and left again with a glance at the clock above the mantel. Mr. Vale watched her go, then leaned confidentially towards Poirot. "Goes up there a deal," he said. "Keeps company with Mr. March, if you can call it that. No harm in her. Though I'd not climb those stairs on a wet night, not for love nor money." "Ah." Poirot polished a drop from his cuff. "And why should one climb them, if the roof is above and the rain is above that? Yet you speak as though the roof is visited." Mr. Vale chuckled. "You'll have heard of his ways already then. If the heavens open, Mr. March must be out under them. Like an altar he makes of those tiles." Poirot's eyebrows twitched. "And the service is tonight?" "Likely," said Mr. Vale. "He was in this afternoon, arguing over the bill for his lawn roller oil. Said I'd charged him for a dram more than he'd had. He'd argue with the 10 Commandments, that one." Still, he broke off as a bicyclist hissed past the window, tires whispering on the wet. "Dr. Lowe," he added. "Late round for him." The bar's talk resumed. Poirot finished his omelette with neat satisfaction, paid his account to the penny, and debated the short dash to the stairs. Outside, the village clock struck 10, the sound went up soft and round into the rain. Later, those who lived along Brook Lane would say they saw a figure on the roof of Brook House just before 11. Young Toby Green, out with a torch and a guilty packet of cigarettes, swore that the figure spread its arms and laughed, the water making a silver river off the elbows. Mrs. Pargeter, who had less romance in her, said the person looked to put to it, her phrase, like someone urged to go where they did not wish. From his parlour opposite, Mr. James Ellery, keeper of the fiercest garden wall in Christendom, claimed he heard a voice called "Steady there," and the scrape of something heavy dragged across a tile. But Mr. Ellery had argued with Mr. March that very morning across that wall, and the constable later marked his account as inclined to embroidery. At 5 minutes past 11 Miss Blythe knocked at Brook House. She knocked twice, then tried the handle. The front door opened a hand's breadth and stopped with the chain in place. Miss Blythe called "Edwin" several times. She said she heard the soft tick of a clock and the sigh of water in the pipes. When no one answered, she went away, irritated and a little chilled. She told herself Edwin March had gone up to his roof and could come down in his own good time. At past, the rain eased to a hushed, soaking fall. The village clocks ticked on. In the White Hart sitting room, Poirot arranged his handkerchiefs to dry at equidistant intervals, considered the geometry of the hearthrug, and allowed his mind, like a careful dog, to sniff at its corners. Words from Mr. Vale stuck there: altar, roof, service. And that late bicyclist, the doctor, whose lamp had bobbed like a will-o'-the-wisp in the lane. The cry came a little after midnight. A woman's voice, thin and tearing, flew down Brook Lane: "Help! Oh, someone help!" Poirot was already in the doorway, hat on, when Mr. Vale reached for his coat. They went out together, and the rain, like a prudent thief, chose that moment to grow gentle, as if to see better what it had accomplished. They found Miss Blythe standing in the garden of Brook House with both hands to her mouth. The front door now gaped, the chain hanging loose. Light from the hall made a pale path over the wet flags. Within, the house smelt of damp wool and polish. On a side table a tray waited with a teapot and 2 cups. One cup was stained, the other barely kissed by tea. A fine detail, yet it pricked Poirot's attention as a pin pricks a finger. "Up there," Miss Blythe whispered, pointing. "On the roof." The staircase in Brook House was narrow and steep, the sort of staircase that encouraged careful thoughts. Mr. Vale led, Poirot followed, Miss Blythe came after, shivering. At the top a small landing gave onto a low door with a brass hook. A damp slick of air breathed through its frame. Mr. Vale lifted the hook and shoved, but the swollen wood resisted. Poirot stood aside, eyes half-lidded, and observed the skirting. There, barely a thumb's width from the door, a dark bead of water trembled and slid off into the gap. The rain had been inside recently. They heaved the door open. The roof beyond was a shallow valley between 2 slopes of tile. The night pressed close, the world outside the fumbling lamplight was a soft, murmuring wall. Mr. Vale went on hands and knees out into the rain's cool breath. Poirot crouched neatly and followed. Edwin March lay a little to the left of the central ridge, face down, arms crooked under him as though in weariness. The rain had settled a clean gloss over his hair and the back of his jacket. Where his cheek met the tile, a line of paler skin showed. That line struck Poirot immediately as unpleasantly final. Mr. Vale touched the shoulder gingerly and swore. Miss Blythe made a sound like a bird's wing striking glass. Poirot's lamplight moved delicately from detail to detail. The soles of Mr. March's shoes were dark and very clean. At the edge of the roof, near the iron gutter, a single tile sat slightly askew. Between the puddled patches 2 sets of prints interrupted the rain stippling, one long and flat with a nick at the instep, the other shorter, lighter, and set closer together. The downpour had already gone to work on them. They would be gone with another 10 minutes of patience from the sky. Poirot did not touch the body. He noted the angle of the head, the way the left hand curled tight as if closing on something small, the pale thread of a scratch along the back of the neck where the hair thinned. He let the light pass over these things as one passes a fingertip over the grain of wood, to feel its truth. Constable Briggs arrived with an air of damp competence and a notebook like a talisman. He said the doctor had been sent for and that Miss March, the niece, was on her way in a hired car. Miss Blythe stood aside, arms wrapped about herself, eyes hard and bright. Poirot watched her, then the open roof door, then the tray downstairs through the flimsy architecture of memory, a teapot, 2 cups, one hardly used. "Slip," Briggs announced after a first look, frowning at the tiles. "Tragic, but that's what it'll be." "Always told him, I did, one day that daft washing will do for you, Mr. March." Poirot's gaze travelled from the spotless soles to the askew tile, to a thin smear at the gutter's lip that was not quite rust and not quite dirt. He said nothing. He took his handkerchief and, with an apology to the night, patted his moustache dry. By the time Dr. Lowe's bicycle lamp bobbed into the garden, the rain had thinned to a lace of sound. The doctor came up briskly, rubber cape squeaking faintly, face composed into professional regret. He crouched by the body, touched the neck very gently, frowned at the scratch, and shook his head. "Poor devil," he said. "Neck's gone. Swift, I should think." "Ah." Poirot's voice was mild. "And the time, if you please, doctor?" Lowe glanced at the dark. "Within the last hour, I should say." Poirot's eye had already strayed to Mr. March's waistcoat, where a small silver watch lay in the pocket, chain neat against wet cloth. With careful fingers that did not disturb so much as a raindrop, Poirot lifted it free. The hands glinted up at him, 23 minutes to 12. The watch had stopped, drowned or jarred. He returned it as he had found it, and the chain made a polite, tiny sound as it settled. Below, somewhere very far away, a car drew up, and a woman's voice called Edwin's name once, twice, as if she could summons him back with the right syllable. Poirot closed his eyes for a heartbeat, not in weariness but in calculation. He had come to Little Barrow to avoid the rain. Instead, the rain had brought him a problem, and problems, however damp, sharpened him. "Constable," he said gently, "if you will be so good as to keep everyone from the roof, and if Mr. Vale will find a rug for Mademoiselle Blythe. There is nothing more to be done for Monsieur March tonight, except, perhaps, to tidy the little details." Briggs peered at him. "Tidy, sir?" Poirot's smile was small and tidy itself. "My's OUI. The truth, it is always tidy in the end. It is the lies that are untidy." He looked once more at the two sets of footprints dissolving under the soft insistence of the rain and felt, rather than thought, the first thread slip between his fingers. Chapter 2. Poirot arrives. The dawn after Edwin March's death broke reluctantly. A pallid sun pushed against a sky still hung with damp rags of cloud, as though unwilling to reveal too much of what the night had concealed. In Little Barrow, curtains twitched, gossip grew legs, and rumour trotted briskly from one doorway to the next. The death of Edwin March, eccentric, quarrelsome, and now, it seemed, ill-fated, was on every lip before the morning milk had cooled. Hercule Poirot, however, emerged from his room at the White Hart Inn looking entirely unruffled by the night's events. His moustache was immaculately waxed, his shoes polished to a shine that mocked the puddles of the street. While the villagers leaned from their thresholds in shawls and boots, Poirot strolled, umbrella poised, as though Little Barrow were no more than a curious exhibit in a museum of English countryside life. He found Constable Briggs outside Brook House, notebook in hand, expression stern in a manner more hopeful than convincing. The small crowd at the gate fell respectfully back, half out of deference to authority, half out of delight at fresh spectacle. Poirot, with a polite lift of his hat, passed among them as a bishop might pass through a congregation. "Bonjour, Monsieur le Constable," Poirot greeted. "You have, I see, already taken command of the stage. A most diligent man." Briggs shifted, uncertain whether to bristle or bow. "We've ruled it a fall, sir." "Unfortunate, but no sign of, well, anything else. Dr. Lowe will provide the particulars." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, a fall. A man of 60 climbs to his roof in the rain, slips, and dies. It is possible, naturellement. But he raised a finger, I beg permission, all the same, to examine again." The constable hesitated. He had heard of Poirot, what policeman in England had not, and though his pride smarted, his prudence prevailed. "If you think it worth your time, sir. But mind the tiles." Poirot's gaze flickered upward to the roofline. "I assure you, I never mind the tiles. It is they who must mind me." The study below. Inside Brook House, Poirot began not with the roof but with the study, the last place March had certainly been alive. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and damp wool. On the desk, papers lay in unruly stacks, though a ledger had been placed with care at the center. Poirot touched nothing at first. He simply looked, allowing the details to whisper. The tray with the teapot and 2 cups remained, where Constable Briggs had ignored it. Poirot bent close. 1 cup showed the brown ring of tea drunk deep. The other bore only the lightest stain, as if liquid had been poured but barely sipped. The spoon beside it was spotless. 2 persons sat here, Poirot murmured, but one drank, the other did not. And they left together, or, at least, they were expected to. From the hearthrug a damp trail led faintly towards the narrow stair. Not heavy footprints, but smudges where wet cloth had brushed. Poirot crouched, nose almost to the floor, and smiled faintly at the symmetry. "It is like embroidery," he told Briggs, who looked bewildered. "The pattern is small, but exact. Every stitch tells." On the roof. They climbed again to the roof. The rain had washed away much, but not all. Poirot produced from his pocket a small magnifying glass, the sort more suited to a jeweler than a detective. On hands and knees he inspected the gutter, the shifted tile, the faint smear along the ridge. "You see, mon ami," he said to the constable, "the shoes of Monsieur March were too clean. Regard. The roof is covered in this fine grit, this moss. To walk here leaves the dust, the trace. Yet his soles, spotless. Why? Because they were cleaned after. By whom? And for what purpose?" Briggs frowned, wiping his forehead. "Maybe he cleaned them himself, sir. He was fussy about his shoes." Poirot straightened with a sharp little gesture. "Fussy, yes. But who cleaned shoes upon the very moment of his death? None. It is the murderer who cleans, to make of death an accident." The constable shifted uneasily. "You're saying it wasn't a fall, then?" Poirot smiled thinly. "I say only that it was staged to appear so. We must allow the facts to arrange themselves. The witnesses." By midday Poirot had begun his interviews. He requested, with charming courtesy, that each of the key persons come to the White Hart's private parlour. Mr. Vale the landlord happily obliged. Gossip now had an official stamp. First came Miss Frances Blythe, pale but composed. She wore her grief like an ill-fitting garment, conscious of it, adjusting it. Poirot invited her to sit and offered tea, which she refused with a sharp shake of the head. "You were the last to see Monsieur March alive?" Poirot asked. "I knocked at 11:30, she said. The chain was on." He answered not. "I left." "You did not hear him upon the roof?" Miss Blythe hesitated. "I thought perhaps I heard movement. But I was upset. He often went up there. He liked the feel of the rain. Foolish, but it was his way." Poirot studied her closely. "And you, mademoiselle, did you approve of this habit?" Her lips tightened. "No. But what could I do?" He was stubborn as stone. Poirot inclined his head, then let her go. He did not miss the way her eyes darted to the door as though expecting someone else to enter. Next came James Ellery, broad-shouldered, red-faced, and still bristling with last night's quarrel. He told Poirot he had heard dragging sounds upon the roof, though his account shifted under gentle questioning. "Perhaps I misheard in the rain," he admitted finally, glaring at his hands. "But I know what I don't miss here. That man made my life a misery over a wall. And now he's gone. Well, I'll not pretend I'm sorry." Poirot's moustache twitched. "A candid statement, monsieur. Almost too candid, n'est-ce pas? One must ask, why so very anxious to declare your innocence?" Ellery flushed and muttered, "Say what you like." Clara March, the niece, arrived later in a hired cab, a tall, weary-looking woman with shadows under her eyes. She expressed horror at her uncle's death but showed little grief. He was not an easy man to love, she admitted quietly. Poirot noted that she asked, almost at once, about his will. And last, Dr. Rupert Lowe, brisk and professional. He repeated his verdict, a broken neck, death swift and clean. He might have slipped, easily. Those tiles are treacherous. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Yet, Doctor, the small scratch upon the back of his neck, how does one obtain that in a fall forward? The physician hesitated, then shrugged. Tiles, guttering, who knows? Rain hides much. I can only give the cause, broken neck. Poirot made no reply, but his dark eye shone briefly before dropping to his neatly folded hands. Poirot thinks. That evening Poirot dined alone at the White Hart, consuming with dainty relish a trout caught from the nearby stream. He arranged the peas on his plate into precise triangles while his thoughts clicked like clockwork gears. The tea for two. The footprints washed but not gone. The spotless shoes. The scratch upon the neck. The stopped watch. It is an affair of timing, order, and psychology, he murmured to himself. Someone wished Monsieur March to appear a fool who fell. But the details are, the little details, they contradict. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Outside the window the rain had returned, drumming softly upon the glass. Poirot's smile was faint, inward. Tomorrow, he said, I will pluck at the threads again. And soon, the tapestry, it will reveal the hand of its weaver. Chapter 3. The Suspects. By the following morning Little Barrow had settled into the business of discussing Edwin March's death with practiced efficiency. The rain had spent itself in the small hours, now the hedges steamed gently and the crows on the churchyard yews held a meeting of their own, loud and unhelpful. Poirot, crisp as if pressed by the air itself, began his day where village life began, at the shop and post office. Mrs. Dudgeon, who ran both with a ledger's soul and a robin stare, remembered everything worth remembering and several things that were not. Letters for Mr. March. Poirot inquired, glancing at the pigeonholes. 2 yesterday, she said, passing him a look that measured out curiosity by the ounce. 1 from his solicitor. 1 from the Little Barrow Benevolent Fund. He chaired it, well, chaired himself mostly. The solicitor's hand was on a blue envelope. Important, I dare say. And did he send anything? A note to his niece, registered, posted at 4. Another to Dr. Lowe at past. He was in and out like a clock. Wait, Mr. March was, except when he was arguing. Arguing yesterday. Mr. Ellery came in and stood over him like a thundercloud, Mrs. Dudgeon said. All about that wall. I took my lunch in the back so as not to be struck by any stray words. Miss Blythe came in later for stamps, red-eyed as a fever. She's a good girl, but she's had enough of Mr. March's ways, if you take my meaning. Poirot took it, filed it, and asked for a packet of pins he did not need. He left with those and a small roll of brown paper. In the lane outside a boy leaned his bicycle against the railings and tried to look innocent of both age and tobacco. Monsieur Toby Green, Poirot said mildly, a moment. Toby's hand half closed over his guilty packet in his pocket. Yes, sir. You saw someone upon the roof last night, did you not? You are young, your eyes are good. Tell me again, but this time, very exactly. Toby worried his lip. I was cutting across the green, sir. I had my torch. I heard a laugh up high, so I looked. There was a man with his arms out, like a scarecrow making a show. Then he went to the left and, well, I thought he slipped a bit. I didn't know. The laugh, was it loud? Sort of cheerful? Only it was quick. Like someone making a brave face. He looked away. I'm sorry, sir. Do not be sorry for telling the truth, Poirot said. You may be the most useful person in the village today. He crossed then to Brook House. Constable Briggs, with the air of a man defending a sandcastle at high tide, stood at the gate keeping out the eager and the idle. He allowed Poirot through with a sigh of resignation that bordered on respect. Inside, the study waited with last night's quiet still in it. Poirot drew on the brown paper bag and began. He traced, with pinpoints and string, a small map of the room upon the blotter, desk, tray, chair angles, hearthrug, door. He marked the faint water smears where a wet sleeve had brushed the chair back. He sniffed the teapot, strong Assam, not delicate. He lifted the lid and found 2 leaves clinging to the spout, fresh and unbruised. He weighed a teaspoon in his hand and set it down precisely. At last he opened the ledger placed in pride on the desk. Little Barrow Benevolent Fund. Subscriptions, disbursements, signatures. The book was neat until the most recent page, where a line had been struck through, then rewritten, a sum larger than the rest, paid out the previous fortnight to the medical relief, emergency. The receiving signature was a brisk, practiced hand, the name beneath it, Rupert Lowe. The entry immediately following had been torn out cleanly, only the stitch holes along the spine betrayed it. Poirot's eyebrows rose, then lowered as if to shade their thoughts. He looked to the waste paper basket. It had been emptied. He looked to the coal scuttle. It had not. He drew out, with 2 fingers and a frown of distaste, a crisped corner of blue paper. The singed edge showed a strip of watermark and the ghost of a solicitor's crest. He laid it on blotting paper as tenderly as one sets down a fledgling. Someone tidied too much, he murmured. He went next to the scullery. A towel hung there that smelt faintly of lavender soap and smoke rather than rain. Its corner was remarkably blackened. Upon the rack stood March's shoe brushes, arranged with military zeal. Poirot touched one, a smear of grey came away on his finger. Roof grit. He wrapped the towel in brown paper and set it aside. As he turned, Miss Frances Blythe appeared in the doorway, small and rigid, as though held together by will. I heard you were here, she said. They say you know things. They say a great many things, Poirot replied. Some are even true. She took a breath. I did not kill him, Mr. Poirot. Whatever else people say you heard that from me. Poirot inclined his head. I hear you, mademoiselle. Come, let us walk in the garden. The air, it clears the voices from the head. They stepped out, past the water-burdened roses, to the small square of lawn where the grass lay flattened in dark swathes from last night's footfalls. Poirot looked down, then up to the roofline, measuring spaces with a glance. You cared for Monsieur March, he said. Miss Blythe hesitated. I cared for the man he could be when he forgot himself. A faint, bitter smile. There was a kindness in him. It just did not often find its way to the surface. And last night, why did you come? He sent a note. Said he must speak with me at 11:30 about l'arrangements. I thought, she coloured. I thought he meant money. Or marriage. I was foolish to think either. You are not foolish, you are human, Poirot said. The chain was on. You heard movement. Did you hear the roof door? She shook her head. Only the house breathing and the rain. Poirot returned her gaze to the flattened grass. You have left something out, mademoiselle. Not a lie, no, simply a stitch missed. Think. She looked at the lawn, at the path, at her hands. Oh. The key. He kept the roof door key on a nail in the pantry, but last night the nail was empty. I only remember now because I reached for it myself, foolishly, as if I had any right. That is all. It is enough, Poirot said. Messy. When she had gone, James Ellery came up the path with a stride that had no respect to offer grief. He took off his cap because one does, and because Poirot's gaze made it necessary. "You'll have heard I argued with him," Ellery said at once, a man taking his medicine. "Over the wall." He pushed his line onto my side by the inch, and inches it up. "Inches are very dear to you," Poirot said. "What of last night?" "I heard a dragging sound," Ellery repeated stubbornly. "Something heavy. I didn't go out because it was pelting and I've a chest. And before you say it, no, I did not go over there later to push him off his roof. If I'd wanted him dead, I'd have shouted him down in daylight." "You are a man who prefers open quarrels," Poirot agreed. "Then why did you go round the back of his house earlier and put your boot upon the window ledge?" Ellery blinked. "I didn't." Poirot's finger indicated a smear of dried clay upon the sill at the scullery window, a neat half-moon of tread. "Your garden clay is red. Mr. March's is dark. I have eyes, Monsieur Ellery, and a fondness for roofs, it seems. Did you hope to see him upon it?" Ellery's mouth worked. "I went round to tell him to pack in his racket. The scraping and the banging. But I didn't get as far as knocking. I changed my mind. That's all." "Très bien," Poirot said, as if that were that. By noon Clara March arrived, a pale figure with a hat that attempted dignity and achieved fatigue. She met Poirot in the study, where she stood too close to the desk and too far from the chair, as if unsure whether to sit in her uncle's place or not to touch it at all. "I suppose," she said, with a composed sadness, "everyone thinks I am relieved. I am not. But I am empty of pretense." "You asked the constable at once about the will," Poirot said, not unkindly. "Why?" "Because no one ever told me anything," she replied, equally without malice. "Because I have debts I did not make alone. Because my uncle used my need as a leash. He promised last month to set matters straight if I would obey him in a particular thing. He did not say what. He loved to watch people wait. And did he set matters straight?" Her eyes flickered to the ledger. "He sent me a registered note yesterday. I have not opened it. It sits on my mantel like a small bomb. I am afraid it is full of conditions." He liked conditions. Poirot nodded. "If you would allow me to see it later." She agreed, grateful and resentful in the same breath, and left the room as if afraid it would call her back. Dr. Lowe came at last, summoned by duty and curiosity. He stood with hands behind his back and examined the study with a physician's quick, general glance. He was a tidy man, he approved of tidy rooms. "You are thorough, Mr. Poirot," he said. "I respect that." "I rely upon little things," Poirot answered. "For instance, the timepiece of Monsieur March." "The watch that stopped," Lowe said. "Yes." "A rough guide." "Shock will do that." "Water will also," Poirot said lightly. "And fingers." Lowe's brows lifted. "Fingers?" "One may set a watch, drop it in water, and make a time," Poirot said, as if discussing the weather. "Not that I suggest such theatre here. It is the theory only." The doctor's smile did not reach his eyes. "Theories are useful so long as they do not float you away from facts. The fact is a broken neck. And a small linear abrasion on the nape," Poirot added. "Which I find curious." "Not so curious in a fall," Lowe said. "Edges are sharp. Shall I tell you what I find curious? Your interest in a very ordinary death." "Every death is ordinary to the man who issues certificates," Poirot said gently. "To those who tidy lies, it is altogether interesting." They regarded one another with polite wariness. Poirot noted, without appearing to, the faint shadow of damp at the cuff of the doctor's trousers, too high to be from a garden puddle, too low to be from a roof. Bicycle splash, perhaps. Or something else. When Lowe had gone, Poirot stood alone in the quiet house. He opened the roof door and looked at the narrow stairs leading up. On the frame, at shoulder height, a faint scuff matched the width of a small parcel, perhaps a tray carried carelessly, or a body maneuvered more carefully still. He bent to the floorboards just inside the threshold and found, caught in a crack, a short, pale fibre. He lifted it with a pin. Cotton. The sort one finds in a rolled bandage. ABN, he said to the empty stair. You begin to speak to me, little house. Back in the study, he placed upon the blotter the parcel towel, the singed blue fragment, and the small fibre, as a priest sets out vessels. He seated himself, steepled his fingers, and closed his eyes for a full minute, not in reverence but in exact thinking. What did he have? A man who loved the rain, dead upon a roof he had made a ritual. A chain on a door, then a door unchained. Tea for two, but only one drinker. Shoes too clean. A ledger with a torn page, a doctor with a tidy answer, a niece with a bomb of a letter, a neighbor with clay on his conscience, a companion who noticed missing keys. He opened his eyes and smiled a small, satisfied smile that would have annoyed anyone who did not deserve it. It is not yet the pattern, he told the air. But the stitches are, they lie in their places. We shall see tomorrow who has tugged at the thread. Chapter 4, Shadows in the Rain. The following evening little Barrow wore its grief like a Sunday suit, slightly ill-fitting, yet displayed with pride. The gossip was no longer a ripple but a tide, everyone had heard, and everyone had polished their version until it gleamed. At the White Hart, travellers paused to inquire. At the post office, Mrs. Dudgeon could scarcely measure sugar without inserting commentary about March's rooftop antics. Poirot, however, had little patience for the embroidery of villagers. Gossip, he told Constable Briggs as they walked the lane, is like the fog, it clings, it hides, it misleads. But it may still reveal shape and outline if one looks with precision. Briggs grunted. Outline of mischief, if you ask me. They all hated him, that's plain. Hatred, mon ami, is abundant in the world. Blonde, he murmured. Our victim was dark. Voila, a second visitor confirmed. Briggs scowled. Could be from anyone. The village is full of fair-haired folk. Poirot's moustache bristled. And yet, of all the roofs in Little Barrow, it settles here. None. The rain is a cleaner, but it forgets sometimes. We must be grateful. Contradictions in witness accounts. Poirot then undertook a more systematic review of the villagers' testimonies. He called together, in the sitting room of the inn, young Toby Green, Mrs. Pargeter, and James Ellery, the three who had sworn they glimpsed or heard something that night. He placed them at a round table with a lantern in the centre. Miss Amos, he said gently, you have each given your account. Tonight we will compare them, yes? Sometimes truth is revealed not in what is said, but in what does not agree. Toby repeated his claim of seeing Edwin March laugh with arms raised. Mrs. Pargeter shook her head, frightened. He looked hunted, if you ask me. Ellery swore he had heard dragging sounds, not laughter at all. Observe, Poirot said, leaning forward. 3 witnesses, 3 pictures. Which is correct? Perhaps none. Perhaps each saw a different man. Could it be that it was not Edwin March alone upon the roof? A silence fell, broken only by the drip of rain outside. Poirot tapped the table. We know already 2 pairs of shoes stood there. Now your evidence, divided, contradictory, supports it. One person played the part of the victim, perhaps to mislead. Another, the victim himself. And between them, a trick of the eye, a confusion in the rain. Briggs frowned. You mean they saw someone else pretending to be March? Exactment. A hat, a coat, a silhouette in poor light, it is not difficult. Illusion, it is a weapon. Mrs. Pargeter shivered. That's wicked, that is. To play a part in death. The question of time. Poirot spent the following morning with his pocket watch and a notebook, pacing the rooms of Brook House. He timed the climb from study to roof, the boiling of a kettle, the steeping of tea. 11 minutes, he muttered, for the water to boil, to pour, to steep. 11 more to drink. If the watch stopped at 23 to 12, he must have taken tea near 11:15. Yet Miss Blythe swears she came at past and the chain was on. How then was there time for conversation, for quarrel, for assent? He drew arrows in his notebook, then paused. Unless, of course, the watch tells a lie. Someone wished us to think death struck at one time when it came at another. Thus alibis are manufactured. Ah, très intelligent. A visit to Clara. That afternoon Poirot paid a call upon Clara March at her lodgings, a modest cottage on the far side of the green. She received him in a parlour stripped of ornament, her hands restless upon her lap. "You have opened the letter, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked gently. She nodded, passing him the folded sheet. It was brief, in March's crabbed hand: "Clara, you will inherit Brook House and the bulk of my estate, provided you agree to settle my disputes without litigation and continue the family name with dignity. I rely on your obedience." Poirot folded it neatly. So, he rewards, but also commands. Clara's eyes glistened. "I am grateful, but he used me. Always he used me. I could not have killed him, Mr. Poirot, though sometimes I wished him gone." Poirot gave a little bow. "I believe you. Yet even truth must be tested. Courage, mademoiselle. We are nearer than you think." Suspicion of the doctor. Poirot next sought Dr. Lowe, whose surgery lay at the end of a lane smelling faintly of iodine. The doctor was brisk, his hair smoothed back, his smile faintly impatient. "Still chasing shadows, Mr. Poirot?" he asked. The man slipped. "I cannot say it plainer." Poirot looked round the surgery. "You are efficient. Yet the ledger of the benevolent fund, tell me, why did you receive so large a sum 2 weeks past?" Lowe stiffened. "An emergency. Poor children requiring medicine. Nothing sinister. And the page torn out." Lowe spread his hands. "March must have done that. He kept the accounts." Poirot studied him keenly. "You bicycled here late that night." "Why so late?" "Called to a patient in the next village. I returned after midnight." "Ask anyone." "Ah, but you did not go first to Brook House." The doctor's eyes cooled. "You are making mischief, monsieur. I have work to do." Poirot bowed, but as he left he noted the faint scent of tobacco smoke clinging to the hall, though Dr. Lowe was known to abhor it. Poirot reflects. That night Poirot sat by the inn's fire, arranging matchsticks upon the table. 2 sticks crossed, the victim and his visitor. A third balanced upon them, the false time, the staged accident. He murmured aloud, "We have illusion, contradiction, concealment. 1 cup of tea untouched, 1 watch stopped at a false hour, 1 key missing, 1 hair caught in the gutter. These are not coincidences. They are threads woven by a careful hand." Briggs, who had been watching with bewilderment, said, "You think you know?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I know only this: shadows may fall in the rain, but they cannot hide forever. Tomorrow, we shall tug, and the true figure will step into the light." Closing of the chapter. Outside, the rain fell harder, as though the sky itself sought to cleanse the village of its secrets. But in Little Barrow, secrets clung stubbornly, waiting for Poirot's patient fingers to unravel them, stitch by stitch. He closed his notebook, extinguished the lamp, and whispered, "It is always psychology, Miss Amos. We must ask not only how the crime was done, but why the murderer chose this play upon the roof, this theatre in the rain. The answer will be most revealing." And with that, Poirot retired, leaving the storm to keep its own watch over Brook House and the guilty heart concealed within. Chapter 5, A Question of Timing. The morning of the inquest dawned with a pale, indecisive sun, as though the weather itself doubted whether to continue the business of gloom or allow a timid brightness to creep through. The villagers of Little Barrow, however, had no such hesitation. They gathered in knots outside the church hall where the coroner would sit, whispering and pointing, each face arranged with solemnity that masked a thrill of expectation. Poirot arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. He wore his usual dark suit, pressed to a perfection that made the English villagers glance twice, and his moustache gleamed as though it had been polished like silver plate. He took a seat near the front, folding his gloves with the neatness of a man placing pieces upon a chessboard. Constable Briggs, stout in his uniform, gave him a wary nod from the side. The coroner heard the testimony in due order, Miss Blythe on her fruitless knocking, Mr. Ellery on his quarrel and his dragging sounds, young Toby on the laughing figure. Dr. Lowe declared death by broken neck, almost certainly from a fall. Clara March, pale and contained, confirmed her uncle's eccentric love of rooftop bathing in the rain. The verdict, after this tidy parade of evidence, seemed inevitable, death by misadventure. A murmur rippled through the hall, some nodding in agreement, others whispering disbelief. Poirot rose only at the close, bowing slightly. "I thank you, Monsieur le Coroner. Your duty, it is done. But perhaps, if you permit, the duty of Hercule Poirot is not yet finished." His words drew startled looks, but he offered no explanation, merely adjusted his hat and walked out into the sunlight. Poirot and the watch. That afternoon Poirot returned to Brook House alone, allowed entry by Briggs with a shrug. The study remained much as he had left it, ledgers on the desk, tray upon the side table, the faint smell of damp in the air. He sat, placed the pocket watch of Edwin March before him, and contemplated it with a gaze so fixed one might think he expected the hands to stir. The watch had stopped at 23 minutes to 12. Yet Poirot was not content. He poured water into a shallow bowl, wound the mechanism of the watch slightly, then allowed it to fall in. The hands trembled, ticked, then ceased at precisely 3 minutes later than the immersion. "Voila," he murmured. A drowned watch does not halt at once. It falters, it gasps, then it dies. So, our criminal, he resets it. He stages not only the body, but the time itself. He drew a small diagram. Miss Blythe at 11:30, chain upon the door. March dead upon the roof before midnight, watch declaring 11:37. The neighbors' testimonies scattered between. "It is a puzzle of timepieces and alibis," he said softly. Someone wished the death to seem later, or earlier, than it was. The visit of Miss Blythe. As he made these calculations, a timid knock sounded. Miss Frances Blythe entered, eyes reddened, but her posture taut with resolve. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "I know people talk. They say I wanted Edwin's money, his house, even his hand in marriage. But I tell you, I only wished him steadier. He promised me, once, to change." Poirot regarded her gently. "You loved him, mademoiselle." "I thought I did. But I grew weary of being mocked, of his moods. Last week I told him so. He laughed in my face. That is why, when he sent for me on Tuesday, I almost did not come. But I could not stay away. Do you understand? Parfaitement. The heart, it is not logical. But tell me, did you notice the tea?" She frowned. "Only that it was waiting when I came." I remember because I thought how strange, he hated to pour for others. He always demanded service. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, a small contradiction. One that speaks volumes. James Ellery and the wall. Later that day Poirot encountered James Ellery leaning against his infamous garden wall, pipe clenched between teeth. "You're wasting your time," Ellery grunted. "The inquest's finished. Accidents happen." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, monsieur, your boots left their autograph upon the scullery sill. Why deny it?" Ellery scowled. "Because it looks bad. But I swear to you, I only went round to shout him down. That dragging sound, it stuck with me. As if someone pulled something heavy. I thought better of it and came away." "Perhaps you heard the dragging of the body itself," Poirot suggested mildly. Ellie paled. "Good Lord." He spat onto the grass. "Well, if so, I'm glad I kept to myself. But don't you go trying to hang it on me, sir. I wanted March alive to argue with, not dead to rot." Poirot bowed slightly. "I believe you, monsieur. Your quarrel was too open, too loud. A murderer, he chooses shadows, not shouting." Clara's uneasy silence. In the evening Poirot called upon Clara March again. She showed him the registered note once more, hands trembling. "He tried to bind me even in his death," she whispered. "Do you think me hard, Mr. Poirot, if I say I feel relief?" "Not hard, mademoiselle, honest. But tell me, did he confide to you about his disputes with Dr. Lowe?" Her eyes widened. "He hinted that money was missing from the charity fund. He said he would expose it, but he enjoyed holding the threat over the doctor. I told him to leave it, but he laughed. Always, he laughed." Poirot noted the detail gravely. "So, the motive begins to appear. Yet motive is nothing without method. And it is method that fascinates Poirot." Poirot's late-night experiment. That night, while the inn slept, Poirot returned secretly to Brook House with Briggs's reluctant permission. The rain had begun again, a fine mist that blurred the lantern light. He carried a bundle, a coat, a hat, and his own walking stick. Upon the rooftop he propped the coat and hat upon the stick so that, in silhouette, it resembled a man with arms spread wide. From the lane below, the figure looked uncannily real. "ABN," he murmured. So Toby Green saw laughter. So Mrs. Pargeter saw fear. So Ellery heard dragging. Illusion. One person acts the part of March, while March himself is already silent. Clever, yes, but too clever. For illusions fade, and details remain. He retrieved the bundle, folded it with care, and descended. Poirot reflects. Back at the inn he laid out all the fragments upon the table. The tea for two, 1 cup untouched. The spotless shoes. The towel with roof grit. The singed scrap of solicitor's letter. The pale hair caught in the gutter. The false time set upon the watch. One person, Poirot whispered, constructed a stage upon the roof. They desired an audience, the neighbors, to believe March alive at one moment when in truth he was already dead. They created confusion of time, of identity, of circumstance. But they left behind their signature in the smallest things. Always, always, it is the little details. He leaned back, moustache twitching in satisfaction. Tomorrow, I gather them all. And then, Miss Amos, the truth will begin to shine through the rain. Chapter 6, Red Herrings. The morning broke sullen and heavy, as if the sky itself bore a secret. The puddles in Little Barrow reflected clouds the colour of lead, and the hedgerows drooped under their burden of rain. By this point, the village had ceased to whisper about Edwin March's death. It shouted, speculated, invented. Each parlour produced a theory, and each theory crowned a different murderer. Poirot, strolling neatly between puddles with his patent leather shoes unblemished, smiled to himself. "Everyone here, they make of themselves a detective," he murmured. "And what is the result? Confusion. But confusion, it is good, yes, because into it, the truth will step like a figure from the mist." Breakfast with Constable Briggs. Poirot met Constable Briggs at the White Hart over breakfast. Briggs attacked bacon with determination, while Poirot, precise as ever, spread marmalade in a perfect circle upon his toast. "I'll say this, sir," Briggs muttered, "everybody had reason to wish March gone. Clara with her debts, Ellery with his wall, Miss Blythe with her dashed hopes, and the doctor with his accounts. Any of them could have done it." Poirot dabbed his lips delicately. "And that, mon ami, is the danger. When everyone could have done it, one must be cautious not to decide too quickly. The true murderer, he hides behind the obvious quarrels." "Then who do you suspect?" Poirot lifted a finger. "I suspect all, and none. It is the details that shall accuse." A visit to James Ellery. James Ellery was found pruning roses in his garden with a savagery that suggested the flowers had personally offended him. His wall, stout and overbearing, loomed at his side. "You again," Ellery grumbled as Poirot approached. "What's left to say?" "The man's dead. Nothing brings him back." "Nothing brings him back, no," Poirot said gently. "But one must ask, what brings you out at night to the scullery window? Why the red clay on your boots, eh?" Ellery scowled. "I told you I meant to confront him, but thought better of it." "And yet you did not tell the constable until I confronted you." "Why?" "Because people talk. You think I want half the village pointing their fingers at me? March was a curse, but I'd not risk the gallows for him." Poirot studied him. "Indeed. Your hatred, it is too loud, too simple. Such hatred does not kill, it shouts, it blusters, it quarrels in daylight. Murder prefers the silence." Ellery slammed his shears shut. "Believe what you like, Monsieur Poirot. But you'll not pin it on me." Poirot bowed. "Ah, but perhaps I shall pin upon you only the role of distraction, monsieur. Every story needs a red herring, n'est-ce pas? Clara March's distress." From Ellery's garden Poirot walked to Clara's cottage. She answered his knock with eyes ringed by sleeplessness and hands raw from nervous wringing. "Mr. Poirot," she said, voice trembling, "I cannot bear the glances. People believe I prayed for his death, that I longed for the inheritance." Poirot inclined his head. "And do you?" "I longed for peace," she cried. "For the end of his control. Money without kindness is poison, Mr. Poirot. If I inherit, it will not undo the years of his cruelty." Poirot stepped into the small parlour, noting the unopened bills stacked neatly on the mantel, and the registered envelope still lying, like an unexploded shell, beside the clock. "You have not yet burned it, mademoiselle." "I dare not touch it," she whispered. Poirot took her hand, unexpectedly gentle. "Courage. Whatever poison lies within, it cannot kill you now. And know this, you are not the murderer. For you have suffered too openly, too long. Your relief betrays honesty, not guilt." Her eyes filled. "Then who, Mr. Poirot?" "Who?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience, mademoiselle. The murderer is clever, but not clever enough to outwit Hercule Poirot." Francis Blythe's confession. Miss Blythe received Poirot in her cottage with an air of defiance. She stood stiffly, hands gripping the back of a chair, eyes glittering with unshed tears. "You want to know if I loved him?" "Yes, I did. Foolishly. I thought he might marry me, though he mocked the idea. But I did not kill him, Mr. Poirot. I could not. Poirot's gaze was kind but piercing. And yet you came at his summons. You found the chain upon the door. You heard the house breathing. And you saw the missing key. Her lips parted. Yes. But I told you before. What does it matter? It matters, Poirot said softly, because whoever took the key unlocked the door for murder. Her face drained of colour. You think I? Poirot raised a hand. No, mademoiselle. You are honest. But you know more than you admit. Perhaps you fear to accuse. Perhaps you fear your own heart. But the truth will not wait. Miss Blythe sank into the chair. I only wish it had been me, she whispered fiercely. Then perhaps the village would stop looking at me with pity. Poirot's moustache twitched. Wishing is not doing, mademoiselle. Remember that. Dr. Lowe's polished alibi. The doctor's surgery smelled of carbolic and polish when Poirot entered. Dr. Rupert Lowe stood at his desk, immaculate as ever. You again, Poirot. I hope you don't mean to disturb my patients with more of your theories. Only briefly, Doctor. Tell me again your whereabouts that night. I was called to a patient in the next village. I bicycled there, tended a sick child, and returned after midnight. That is all. Poirot tilted his head. Curious, then, that your trousers bore the splash not of the open road, but of gutter water. And curious, too, that the ledger of the benevolent fund shows a payment to you that cannot be explained. Lowe's eyes hardened. Speculation. You have no proof. Perhaps. Yet you arrived at Brook House that night, your bicycle lamp seen, your scent of tobacco lingering though you do not smoke. One wonders, Doctor, if you were not summoned by March himself to discuss accounts. Lowe's hand clenched upon the desk. Careful, Poirot. You tread on dangerous ground. Poirot smiled thinly. The truth is always dangerous for the guilty. Poirot's reflections by the fire. That evening Poirot returned to the White Hart. He took his place by the fire, where villagers clustered to exchange theories. He did not join their chatter. Instead he set out, upon a napkin, his little collection of facts. Ellery's boot upon the scullery ledge. Clara's unopened letter. Francis's missing key. Lowe's unexplained payment. The false watch. The pale hair on the roof. Red herrings, all, Poirot murmured. Each plausible, each pointing in a different direction. Yet one must ask, which herring swims against the tide? That one is the truth. He arranged the napkin into neat folds, tapped it with a finger, and smiled. Tomorrow, I gather them all. And in the gathering, the murderer will betray himself. Closing the chapter. As he retired, the rain began once more upon the windows, soft at first, then steady. It was as though the sky rehearsed the very scene of murder, repeating it until Poirot could see clearly the theatre upon the roof, the false figure, the silent victim, the clock tampered with, the neighbours deceived. Encore, encore, he whispered to the night. But this time, Poirot shall not be deceived. The curtain will rise, and the guilty shall bow unwillingly to the truth. Chapter 7, The Gathering. The rain had stopped at last, leaving Little Barrow washed and gleaming as though every stone had been scrubbed. The sky was pale, and the hedges steamed gently. But in the air lay a tension as sharp as the smell of damp earth after thunder. Word had spread that Hercule Poirot had requested all the principals of the case to gather that evening at Brook House. The villagers muttered. Some called it melodrama, others a waste of time. But curiosity is a stronger call than skepticism, and by 8 o'clock the study of Edwin March's home was filled. Poirot stood at the hearth, hands folded behind his back, moustache gleaming in the lamplight. He had arranged the room as neatly as a chessboard, chairs in a semicircle, each occupied by one of the suspects. Clara March, pale but proud, Francis Blythe, composed yet brittle, James Ellery, red-faced and truculent, Dr. Lowe, polished to the point of arrogance. Constable Briggs hovered by the door, notebook in hand, eager and wary. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, bowing slightly, "thank you for indulging the whim of an old detective. You believe, perhaps, that the death of Monsieur March was an accident. You believe the inquest has spoken and the matter is closed. Yet I tell you, it is not so. This was no slip in the rain. It was murder." The word fell like a stone into a pond. Clara gasped, Francis clutched at the arm of her chair, Ellery let out a scoffing laugh. Only Dr. Lowe remained still, his smile thin and sardonic. Poirot lifted a hand. "Patience, if you please. The truth, it is delicate, it must be unfolded like a flower. Allow me to take you step by step. The illusion on the roof." Poirot walked to the window, where raindrops still clung like tears. "Several of you saw Monsieur March upon the roof that night. Young Toby Green, you saw him laugh with arms spread wide. Madame Pargeter, you thought he looked afraid. Monsieur Ellery, you heard dragging. 3 witnesses, 3 impressions. Contradiction. Unless, of course, there were 2 figures upon the roof. One alive, one already dead." He turned, eyes glittering. The murderer wished the village to believe March lived until nearly midnight. He staged the illusion. A coat, a hat, a silhouette in poor light, it is not difficult. Meanwhile, March himself lay senseless, soon to be placed upon the tiles. Francis Blythe shuddered. Then Toby saw not Edwin at all. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. He saw a puppet. The theatre of murder had begun. The question of the watch. Poirot stepped to the desk, where he had laid Edwin March's pocket watch. And then, Miss Amos, the matter of time. The watch stopped at 23 minutes to 12. A neat hour for death, convenient for alibis. Yet a drowned watch does not halt at once. I tested it myself, it ticks a few minutes longer before ceasing. So, someone set the hands, then let the water do its work. A deception, again. But why? Because the murderer wished to place himself, or herself, far from suspicion at that hour. Ellery shifted uneasily. You mean the time of death was earlier? Exactment. Monsieur March died before 11:30, when Mademoiselle Blythe knocked upon the chain door. Already he was beyond answering. The chain was not carelessness, it was concealment. The murderer had already acted. The tea for 2. Poirot lifted the silver teapot from the tray. Now we come to the little domestic scene. Tea for 2, cups poured, one hardly touched. Why does a man known for selfishness suddenly play host? Because he awaited someone whose company was not by choice, but by necessity. He sought to calm, perhaps to placate. But see, the second cup was sweetened, though untouched. Why? Because the guest feared poison. They wished the appearance of drinking, but not the taste. Here lies psychology, Miss Amos, a guest who came unwillingly, yet could not refuse. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Francis's eyes flickered towards the doctor. The ledger and the torn page. Poirot held aloft the benevolent fund ledger, its torn page fluttering like a wound. Money, always money. Monsieur March discovered irregularities, payments made, accounts disguised. He threatened exposure. A certain man stood to lose reputation, livelihood, respect. And so, he silenced the threat. The torn page was the proof he sought to destroy. Briggs muttered, Dr. Lowe, under his breath, earning a sharp glance from the man himself. Lowe spread his hands with disdain. Speculation. Nothing proven. Not yet, Poirot said softly. But listen further. The false suspects. Poirot paced slowly, each word falling like a pebble into still water. Monsieur Ellery, you quarrelled with March in daylight, loudly and often. Too loudly, too openly for murder. Mademoiselle Clara, you stood to inherit, but your grief is genuine, you hated his control, yet you did not kill him. Mademoiselle Blythe, you loved foolishly, and your bitterness is real, but not murderous. Each of you carries suspicion, yes. Each of you is a red herring. But the true fish swims elsewhere. He stopped before Dr. Lowe, moustache twitching. Doctor, the evidence circles always back to you. The fibre of cotton by the roof door, from a bandage. The slender matches in the grate. The large sum from the charity ledger. The very knowledge of how to set a watch to deceive. And above all, the psychology. You were the one March could summon late at night, under pretext of a medical visit, without arousing suspicion. The reconstruction. Poirot spread his hands dramatically. Here is what occurred. At 10:30, perhaps earlier, Dr. Lowe came to Brook House. March confronted him with proof of embezzlement from the charity fund. Angry words, threats. Tea was poured. March tried to soothe the matter, but Lowe, fearing ruin, acted. A blow, swift, precise, to the back of the neck, rendered March unconscious. He was dragged to the roof, the door unlocked with the missing key. There, Lowe arranged him upon the tiles, struck down but not yet dead. Then Lowe returned below, donned March's hat and coat, and mounted the roof again to play the part of the eccentric fool in the rain. Toby saw the arms raised in mockery, Mrs. Pargeter saw fear, Ellery heard dragging. All was illusion. Finally, Lowe reset March's watch, soaked it, cleaned the shoes, and chained the front door to complete the disguise of accident. Then he left, bicycling away to his supposed call. But Poirot lifted a finger, he forgot the small details. A hair caught in the gutter. A match of uncommon make. A grain of sugar. A fibre of cotton. All the trifles that betray the hand of a murderer. The unmasking. The silence was absolute. Clara clasped her hands in horror. Francis's lips trembled. Ellery let out a low whistle. Dr. Lowe, pale now but composed, gave a brittle laugh. You spin stories, Poirot. Ingenious, but without proof. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The proof, monsieur, is in the letters Clara hid at your urging. They speak of March's suspicion, his threat to expose you at the next committee meeting. And the solicitor will confirm he prepared papers at March's request, papers that vanished conveniently from this house. You sought to burn them, but even ash leaves its trace. You may deny, but the noose of evidence tightens. Briggs stepped forward, voice firm. Dr. Rupert Lowe, I'll have to ask you to come with me. The doctor looked round, meeting only silence, then sagged into his chair. The fool should have left it alone, he muttered bitterly. He never knew when to stop. Poirot's closing words. Poirot bowed to the room, moustache immaculate. You see, Miss Amos, the truth is never in the grand gesture. It hides in the smallest detail, the untouched cup, the stopped watch, the fibre of cotton. That is why Hercule Poirot is never deceived. Murder may play at theatre upon the roof, but in the end, the curtain falls. Chapter 8, The Curtain Falls. The following morning dawned crisp, with a surprising glint of sunshine spreading across the damp hedgerows of Little Barrow. The storm that had presided over Edwin March's death was gone, leaving the village with a quietness that felt almost guilty. But within Brook House, the shadows of the night still lingered. Poirot had summoned his audience one last time, not merely the suspects, but also a handful of villagers who had been closest to the late march. Mrs. Dudgeon from the post office, young Toby Green, even Mrs. Keats the housekeeper. All gathered in the parlour, eyes wide, voices hushed. At the centre, Poirot stood immaculate in his dark suit, his shoes polished to a brilliance that mocked the soot on the grate and the mud still drying on boots. His moustache curled proudly, as though it too anticipated triumph. Constable Briggs sat by the door, notebook ready, though his pencil trembled with the drama of it all. Dr. Lowe, under watch, sat rigid and silent, his face pale but his jaw set. Miss Amos, Poirot began, his voice as smooth as the polished banister of the staircase, we come to the end of our little tragedy. The truth, she has been elusive, veiled in rain, disguised by shadows, hidden beneath red herrings. But you see, he raised a finger, the smallest details, they betray the guilty hand. And last night, I showed you the murderer. Yet still, some among you ask, how did Poirot see what others missed? Poirot recounts the clues. He turned to the group, pacing lightly. First, the shoes. On a roof such as this, the grit, the moss, they cling. But upon Monsieur March's soles, spotless. Too spotless. Cleaned by the murderer to suggest a slip, yet forgetting that cleanliness can also accuse. He gestured delicately to the desk. Second, the tea for two. A selfish man suddenly plays host? Absurd. He poured because he must, to create an air of peace, to trap his guest in civility. Yet one cup, sweetened but untouched, spoke of fear. Fear of poison, fear of March himself, fear of the scene being noted. It tells us the guest was unwilling. He tapped the silver watch lying upon the blotter. Third, the watch. Stopped at 23 to 12. A false time, for a drowned watch dies slowly. Who but a doctor, would know how to stage so medical a deception? He lifted the ledger. Fourth, the money. A payment too large, a page torn away, a corner of solicitor's letter burned. All to hide embezzlement. March threatened exposure. The beneficiary? Dr. Rupert Lowe. Lowe shifted but said nothing. Poirot pressed on. Fifth, the illusion. Witnesses saw March alive upon the roof, laughing, staggering, afraid. Contradiction. Unless it was not March at all, but the murderer, wearing hat and coat, playing his part in the rain while the real March lay already broken. A theatre of death. The audience stirred, whispering. Frances Blythe pressed a hand to her throat, Clara closed her eyes as though bracing herself. The psychological stroke. Poirot raised both hands, and the whispers stilled. But, Miss Amos, the greatest clue was not in objects but in psychology. Consider. Who could March summon late at night without raising suspicion? His doctor. Who possessed the knowledge to inflict a precise blow that would fracture the neck yet leave the illusion of a fall? His doctor. Who feared exposure more than anyone, for to be revealed as dishonest is death to a man of medicine? His doctor. He turned sharply, moustache bristling, to Dr. Lowe. Monsieur, you saw the walls of your reputation about to crumble. You sought to save yourself by striking down the man who threatened you. Yet you underestimated the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. Lowe's confession. The silence was heavy as rain clouds. At last Dr. Lowe exhaled, the sound like air from a punctured tire. Yes, he said hoarsely. Yes, he cornered me. He had the papers. He enjoyed it, taunting me, promising exposure. I begged him to let it go. He only laughed. Lowe's eyes grew distant. I struck him. Not hard, but he fell. The back of his neck, so fragile. I meant only to silence him for a moment, but when I saw what I had done, I panicked. The rest, you know. I tried to make it look like his cursed rain-bathing had killed him. I thought the storm would wash away my part. His hands clenched on his knees. I did not mean murder, but murder it became. Clara gave a strangled sob. Frances turned her face away. Ellery muttered something like a curse. Poirot bowed his head solemnly. The intention, it matters, yes. But the result remains. A man lies dead, and you will face justice. Constable Briggs rose, laying a firm hand on Lowe's shoulder. The doctor did not resist. His proud carriage was gone, he looked already diminished, as though guilt had shrunk him. The aftermath. When Lowe had been led away, silence remained. At last Poirot spoke, softer now. Mademoiselle Clara, you inherit not only Brook House but also freedom from tyranny. Use it well. Mademoiselle Blythe, you mourn not a lover but an illusion, be glad the truth is known, for false hope is worse than grief. Monsieur Ellery, you have your wall to guard, but no longer an enemy to fight. Perhaps peace may grow where quarrel once bloomed. He looked around the room. And for you all, remember this, murder is rarely a blow from nowhere. It is born of weakness, of fear, of pride. Had March tempered his cruelty with kindness, perhaps Dr. Lowe would never have raised his hand. But cruelty breeds cruelty, and the rain washed away only the disguise, not the deed. Poirot reflects. Later, alone at the White Hart, Poirot sat by the fire with a small glass of crème de menthe. Outside, the village was settling, the gossip already turning from shock to relish. He placed the final scraps of evidence before him, the grain of sugar, the scrap of blue wax, the fibre of cotton. He touched each gently, as if thanking them. Little things, he said softly. Always it is the little things. The murderer creates the grand illusion, but it is the trifles, the watch, the towel, the sweetened cup, that undo him. That is why Hercule Poirot succeeds where others fail. For I see not only the theatre, but also the dust behind the curtain. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Already the village would return to its rhythms, Mrs. Dudgeon balancing her books, Ellery pruning his roses, Clara confronting her new life. Frances Blythe, perhaps, would find peace at last. Only March remained absent, but perhaps in absence the village would find a strange, guilty relief. Poirot raised his glass. To order, he murmured. To balance restored. And to the little grey cells, which never deceive. The fire crackled, the rain at last forgotten. The curtain had fallen, and Hercule Poirot, as always, had taken his bow.